switching back and forth in our presentation. A little bit of background to begin with. We work on a seed project, Sustainable Environment Actionable Data, which is an NSF-funded DataNet project that works on building tools and services that support data curation and data preservation for sustainability science. There are quite a few people working on the project, and I think we're happy with their effort, obviously. So one of the things that we face working on data curation, supporting data curation, is that there are a lot of challenges. And yesterday and today there were conversations about data already, and I think pretty much everything that is on this slide was already covered. All these challenges that research can go on, it can be short, it can be long, it can span over the years. The data, it's not something that is homogeneous, and it can be very complex. Usually we don't deal with files, we deal with collections. They can be mini collections, but they can be huge collections. They can be of various sizes. Data goes through multiple stages, and again, going back to the research life cycle and the beginning of data collection and then the end, which might be a publication but might be something else, it's important to keep in mind that there are multiple stages. Work that happens with data, it involves a lot of different processes, including analysis, but other processes as well. And we're working not with just products, but other activities that go on while processing the data. There are many different kinds of agents that work on data, and all of it sort of involves nonlinear relationships. And this is what we try to capture and formalize, because when building infrastructure or tools, we need to think sort of ahead, and we need to think in advance of what we're going to do, because once you start building, it may not work as you thought it would. So to address these challenges, this is something that we work on. The framework that we develop, we build upon the work of others, primarily David DeRuhr and Carol Goebel. This idea that data and research products are not just single objects, but they are bundles, and you need to keep them as bundles. It came up in the computational sciences a lot, and people realize that also it's not just data sets or files that you work with, it's scripts, software, and all these different types of objects that we deal with. So the research objects framework, we try to capture these multiple aspects of working with data, and primarily it has these 5 components that it needs to be identifiable, obviously. We need to track it through the life cycle. It has content, and this is one of the aspects that we're dealing with when preserving these kinds of objects. Agents that need to be conceptualized as different types of agents, and we deal with data creators, curators, and data reuse scientists, as each of them having different types of activities that need to be captured as they work with data. Relationships, as I mentioned, the research objects are bundles and they go together. It's important to capture different types of relationships. We began with sort of a set of simple relationships, and these are the bundles are aggregators, so there is a relationship of aggregation. Entities within the bundles are related to each other, so there is a related to it relationship. Each entity can be described, and the bundle itself can be described. So there's a description relationship, but also the versioning and derivation are very important types of relationships that you need to be working with when we talk about data, because of this reuse aspect of it, particularly. And data keep changing. Once something is stabilized, if we're going to support reproducibility, especially, and reuse in the future, this is something that we need to be keeping in mind. And as I mentioned, research objects go through different stages, or they change states, and we work with the whole research life cycle and trying to capture whatever is going on with data through from the beginning to the end, or the cycle when it goes back. So we conceptualize the states of research objects as being live, being curated, and being published. And I'm going to let Dharma talk about live objects.
Okay. So one of the central concepts that we deal with is the fact that we're dealing with active curation, which means, as Inna alluded to, that curation activities are happening from the beginning of the object's life cycle. It's not just something that happens when it gets passed off to a repository, but it's happening as early as when the scientists start gathering the data and start working with it themselves. So we have sort of the research object existing in, or going through, three main states: live objects, curation objects, and publication objects. And there's a few important characteristics and allowances of each of these states that we'd like to highlight. So live objects are mutable objects that are in a state of flux. They can be changed, they are changed, they are not a static, immutable thing. They include collections of data and metadata that the scientists are actively building, editing, and transforming as they work. They're mostly handled by a project team, so it's a team of scientists that are working with the data. So for example, we have a group called the Mississippi Flood Project. A small team of scientists are the ones that are adding the metadata, adding data, adding different derived products to the object. I'd like to highlight also that these practices are driven primarily by self-centered or project-centered needs. So the things that they're doing are meant to facilitate their own use and management of the data for their own sort of immediate work. Many scientists are potentially involved in adding metadata, so it's not just one person is in charge of one object, but there's potentially a lot of different people that are contributing, editing, and transforming the object. So when a team decides that a research object, a live object in this case, is ready for publication, they can initiate a process whereby it goes through this intermediate state and then it becomes a publication object. So the next type of object or object state I'd like to talk about is the curation objects. So when they initiate the publication, as I said, it sort of goes into this intermediate phase. The content of the object is packaged using Bagot protocol, which stores a bag of the content data, in this case, and the metadata so that it supports the object's storage and transfer. And then we also use the OAI ORE to map the metadata and its relationships. At this point, the primary person dealing with the object is a designated repository curator. And it is somewhat mutable. The metadata can be changed if it needs to be made better for long-term preservation, but the object itself isn't really changed. The data themselves aren't changed. Once the curation object is sort of complete, it's undergone the professional curation, if you will, it goes into a publication object. And this is an object that is now immutable. The object itself is assigned a persistent identifier, a DOI, so that it's citable. As I said, it's no longer this object that can be in flux and be changed. It's deposited with one of our partner repositories, and we do track things like revisions, its lineage in terms of revisions. So if a team found that something was wrong with the data, we would track that there were several revisions of this object, and derivations, because one of the concepts behind our project is that we want people to be able to take the published objects, move them back into, I shouldn't say move them, but maybe take a copy of that published object and then have it be a live object in the system, then it becomes sort of a new thing, but that relationship would be tracked. So Ina and I are both going to kind of talk about what it means to work with these different objects in SEED. And I'm going to hit upon the live object. So this is an example of a live object in project space. So teams of scientists work with the live objects in a space that they control. They can choose who has access. They can upload virtually any kind of data and add almost whatever metadata that they want. So what we see here is a screenshot of a data set with its information page. You can see many different metadata fields here. Seed, we don't impose any metadata. They can add as little or as much as they want. They can choose the controlled vocabulary if they want to use it. So just some examples to call out. They can add license information about copyright. They can add the data's maturity, so they can say if it's raw or heavily derived. They can add a number of different Dublin core-oriented fields, such as contact information, abstract, location information. We also extract whatever metadata that we can from the file, so things about the image size, where it was created, if the device that they use to create the data has some metadata package in it, we extract all of that. So I guess one thing to highlight, I already said this, but I think it's important to say again, is that this can be incremental. It's not just that they upload the data and then they're adding all the metadata all at once necessarily. This is something that can happen over time with many different people who are involved. So when the team is done with the data collection, meaning that they think it's ready to be released, they're ready to have it more available to the public, and they want to publish and preserve the data, they can mark it as ready for publication, and this begins a process that leads into the curation and published object, and Ina is going to talk more about that.
So the idea is that, and then there's another screenshot of how the system works. The idea is that the system should facilitate the work of these different types of agents, right? And the scientists and researchers can do what they need to do, and they're not constrained by these concepts or ideas of a particular metadata scheme or a particular approach. But then we all realize that it's important to provide curation and preservation kind of activities that enhance upon the research object that's been created, or if there's a need to do that. So then the curation step is to facilitate other types of professionals working with the data, rearranging if necessary, adding metadata and other types of things, and then making sure that it's ready for long-term preservation. And then the object goes into a repository, and this is what we mean by publishing, right? It goes into this immutable state. So I want to conclude by referring to these broader implications. The research framework that we use, it's kind of independent of standards or particular approaches, and it allows us to conceptualize things that later on we could employ different kinds of protocols, like we use Baggett and OI now, but it can change in the future, and our understanding, our conceptual approach allows us to do that. We're not tied by that. But the importance of the research object concept is that it allows us to think about how to capture content, context, processes, and states, and thinking about it all together in a systematic way. We acknowledge that entities can be edited on multiple levels, and that's what we're trying to support. Again, like I said, these bundles, they can be very complex and very heterogeneous, and then you need to think about it not just in terms of formats, but thinking about different aspects of these entities. We also recognize that the way we deposit things for long-term preservation can change. And it's not, right now institutional repositories might be one of the most viable options. Cloud storage or domain repositories can come later. So we're using a matchmaking mechanism to determine these best approaches to where the research objects should go. Definitely, it's a work in progress, and a lot can be done. There is the ownership of research objects is very complex, so there is a need to support multiple licensing and multiple permissions. Lineage tracking, like I said, the reuse framework is a crucial component of the current data landscape, and it's really important to track lineage. But it's not just to track who revised or created a new object, it's also to build tools that facilitate trust, authority, and authenticity of these data sets, which is a very complicated problem. And because we're focusing on this reuse framework, we're looking for more cases of reuse, because the more cases we have, the more details we get. And with every case, pretty much we learn the new complexities and the new challenges that we have to deal with, and this helps to expand the framework and to improve it and to make it more usable. Thank you.